What's going on, friends? This is the Roaming Prepper. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to wind up taking a little bit of a side direction or side tour in my normal videos regarding preparedness because I want to address a geopolitical issue that seems to be rising up in a lot of countries, and I think it's very dangerous. And historically, it's been proven to be dangerous. I'll be right back, and let's talk about the principles behind true socialism and communism and where it ultimately leads. I'll be right back, and we're going to talk about that. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. Once again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or if I premiere this video, which I normally will do, put it in the premiere comments, and if I'm on my live chat, I'll try to answer them that way. So normally, everyone knows I try to not get too involved in politics unless it's relevant to prepping. I truly believe that we get involved in politics and it dilutes and distracts us. It's all bread and circuses from the day-to-day necessities, such as making sure you have sufficient clean water, such as making sure your family knows where to go in the event of an emergency, such as training for different skill sets. However, there are certain political views that are detrimental. And I actually think not only are they contrary to the belief of a free republic, which is what we live in. We're not in a democracy, we're in a republic. But we also endanger our ability to be prepared. Specifically, what I'm talking about is this resurgence of interest in socialism and hence communism, which in my mind are essentially the same. One is simply a running step to the other. Either way, both will lead to a scenario where you have too much power centralized in one area, in one party, in one government with no real checks and balances. It then becomes a question of who is the most cunning and ruthless to take power. For those of you who are fans of George Orwell, Animal Farm, they often refer to the old pig, old major, as well as the one pig called Snowflake, and then the pig who ultimately takes power. The old pig was representative of Lenin. The other two were actually Lenin's proteges, Stalin and Trotsky. All of them dedicated communists, all of them dedicated socialists. However, Trotsky was an idealist, much like the old man, who the old man believed in shedding blood purely to accomplish the revolution. Trotsky was of the same mind. If we don't need to shed blood, he believed in the utopian principle, which unfortunately he was proven wrong by the other protege, Stalin. As soon as the old man died, Stalin quickly proved that he was the ruthless one by killing a bunch of political opponents or having them arrested. He then ran Trotsky out of the country, who then went to the US and then to Argentina, where ultimately at some point the then KGB went and killed him with I believe it was a hatchet. It's an awful way to go. He was killed in his own study. And ultimately Stalin took power, and we all know what happened then. He imprisoned and killed 20 million people within the USSR that we know of. So when you have a government system that concentrates all that power into one place with no opposing party, with no real opposition, with no checks and balances, you ultimately will result in a situation where it's the most ruthless takes over. Again, my opinion and my observation, being a student of history, I'm by no means a historian, so check your facts for yourself. But in every country these principles have truly been tried, they have failed. And truly the only reason communist China functions is because they've hybridized their industry to be somewhat capitalistic, and they trade with capitalistic and republics and free democracies around the world. Otherwise, they'd probably fail too. I'll probably get this video flagged for saying that, but it is what it is. I actually took another step further. I purchased the Communist Manifesto itself, translated to English, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I have mispronounced that. I'll give a little background. Communist Manifesto, originally the Manifesto of the Communist Party, is an 1848 political pamphlet by German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, commissioned by the Communist League and originally published in London in German as Manifesto der Kommunistischen Partei, just as the revolutions of 1848 began to erupt. Keep in mind, in the late 1800s, all the way into World War I, we still had aristocracies, we still had oligopolies, we still had monarchies, we still had kings and czars and princes who were effectively running their countries. There weren't parliaments back then. It presents an analytical approach to the class struggle and the problems of capitalism. This is the introduction, and the capitalist mode of production, rather than a prediction of communism's potential future reforms. The manifesto summarizes Marx and Engels' theory about the nature of society and politics, that in their own word, the history of all hitherto existing society is a history of class struggles. Interesting premise, not entirely incorrect, but it was based on a time when they were watching capitalists gain a lot of power without any kind of check and balance, and the beneficiaries of capitalism were actually monarchs, princes, and an aristocracy that was where they were purely because of family and blood, not because they earned their place there. This context is important because and I've lost my train of thought there, but this context is important because to understand that at that time there were literal kings and queens, they were not, if this was written in 1848, in the not 50, 100 years before, they were, having the French Revolution. So this was a very tumultuous time in Europe. America was a free country. Actually, not 15 years later, the US wound up having its civil war. So these were very tumultuous time, which ironically coincides with the fourth turning of that generation. We're currently living in the fourth turning of this generation, which is a whole nother conversation. Anyway, a few of the premises in this book, and I think it's important for people to understand the actual beliefs of the system. So on page 22 of this book, which I do believe I got on Amazon, I got it online. It says, nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be generally applicable. And these are the 10 steps in the manifesto. As you can see, I wrote notes in there. Okay, above them, the abolition of property and land and application of all rents and land to public purposes. Basically, the socialistic takeover of all private property. You don't own a house, you don't own a farm. The government owns all, which is what Russia did. 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. This is verbatim from the book, which is what we're seeing now, a graduated, heavy progressive and graduated income tax during a time of a recession, now in 2022. You don't believe me? Go fill up your tank of gas. Confiscation, the next step, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Now, I found that interesting. Immigrants and rebels. Who are the rebels? The rebels are defined as anybody who does not comply, anybody who disagrees. There is no choice in a communist or socialist society to have your own opinion. This is something important for both the left and the right to understand, because if you don't think a dictatorship can come from too far left or too far right, you drank too much Kool-Aid. Because it can, and it has. The rebels would represent any of us who are free thinkers, any of us who want to question things. You did not put your face covering on, you're a rebel. You did not get your pinch, you're a rebel. Oh, you got a different pinch instead of the one we told you to get, you're a rebel. You don't pay the tax we told you to pay. You did not go to where we told you to go. You're a rebel. I want you to think about that carefully. That verbiage is very relevant. 5, a centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. We control your money. You don't comply, you're a rebel, now you're poor. Doesn't matter how hard you worked, you don't comply. Sounds like the social credit system. And with modern technology, they can do it. And if you think just because you voted for blue instead of red, that, oh, well, it's only going to happen in red, wrong. Because you go out and protest against something they do against you, now you're a rebel and you're screwed too. That's how quick this thing can turn. 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. We're seeing that right now as well. We're seeing it in the constant, not the regulation per se or via law, but the constant, discrete, non-public manipulation of Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms that was being done by current administrations. But it's been done by other administrations too, to be fair. This is another danger. Right now, that platform known as TikTok in the States may show me one thing and may show, it's custom algorithm for different viewers and different likes. But in China, teenagers get to see morally uplifting things, serve the state, become an engineer, be a doctor, have a family, be a parent, pay your taxes. In America, they're showing kids depressing things. Go read about it. Look at the articles. This is not a joke. This is not and I continue to pontificate on TikTok, and when they kick me off, they can go to hell. But yes, that's happening there too. So talk about control of the communications. Okay, 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state and bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of a soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Essentially, we own the means of food production. 8, equal liability for all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Now keep in mind, this was an agrarian society at the time. This is what Russia did, right? But they made people plant whatever they said they should plant to make production goals, as opposed to planting in accordance with nature and how nature dictates you need to plant. You can't plant potatoes year-round. You can't plant corn year-round. You have to leave fields fallow. You have to fertilize. You have to change the crops to refresh the soil. Not part of communism. 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. So, you may want to live in the country, but you know what? We need people in the city. Go to hell. Go to the city. Oh, now you don't go to the city. Guess what? Remember part 4? You're now a rebel. Now you can go to the gulag. Folks, this is in the book. And I'm sure most of the people watching this will be sitting there going, holy crap. But yeah. 10, free education for all children in public schools, which we have now. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production. That might be the only thing I agree with, is teaching children about production and agriculture and actual things that are functional. So out of these 10 points, and we can argue about that too, actually, because it's basically you're teaching them to be laborers, but Timmy wants to be a doctor, or Susie wants to be a pilot. Well, guess what? That sucks, kids. We decided you're going to be tire manufacturers, and off they go. So these are the premises. These are the 10 steps for communism, which are very close to the 10 steps for socialism. If you don't believe me, read some of Saul Alinsky's 10 steps. These are the kind of things that will happen. And the people who support this don't realize that they too could become victims of this same philosophy. Absolutely possible. And there was one other topic, and I lost my place in here. But essentially, one thing they did say is the family unit. And this one's probably the most telling. The bourgeois, which is the middle class at the time, sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. Now, at the time, remember, they're referring to aristocrats. It's actually not the middle class. The bourgeois were the elites, the rich, if you will, the oligarchs, as we refer to them now, as a mere instrument of production. At the time, daughter was given to the rich guy, and now she had kids, and she was an instrument of production. So I get where he's coming from. He hears that instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally, can come in no other conclusion than that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. So in other words, it will be a community of women, right? If I'm married, that's my wife. The children from this marriage are my children. No, because that creates aristocracy. That creates someone to pass down to. They won't have that. Remember, because we've already socialized the land, the possessions, and the banks. So basically all children are now products of the state. So you can have kids with whoever. So family units, culture, whether it's white culture, black culture, Latino culture, Korean, Chinese, take your pick. Nope. There's one culture. It's the states. And folks, I'm literally reading this out of this book. Also, on what foundations is the present family? On capital, on private gain, it is completely developed form. This family exists only among the bourgeois. So again, he's using a very specific historical example, which was the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie, or the bourgeois, which was the elite rich, if you will, at the time, who were often extravagant. Think of Hollywood. Think of some of these movie stars who, oh, I married so-and-so, and then they catch him with a 14-year-old, babysitter 2 weeks later. That type of person, that's who he was looking at. Now, is he right that that's kind of disgusting? Absolutely. But in his mind, the way to solve that is no families. Read it. I challenge all of you. Go get the book and read it. Educate yourselves. This is what people are pontificating about. This is what people are thinking they want to do. And a lot of folks say, oh, well, we're Antifa, we're anti-fascists, right? But remember, and then they say we're anti-fascist, we're anti-Nazi. But if you think about it, Nazi stood for National Socialist Organization, if you do the translation. The Nazi Party, that's where the Z comes in. It's actually representative of socialism. So at the end of the day, whether you go too far right, like Nazi Germany, too far left, like these guys, those guys, you wind up in the same place, and it's not a good one. So folks, educate yourselves as to what people are asking for. We have too many people who just nod their head at TikTok or nod their head at whatever the hell they're watching, and they don't ask these questions. And my fear is we're going to have a generation of people who will be making decisions with no clue, which is exactly what some people want. At the end of the day, one thing it doesn't cover, which George Orwell covers in Animal Farm, is some animals deserve more than others. At some point, the leaders will decide that, well, because we have a burden, we need more. And you still wind up with class struggle. The hypocrisy of communism has been demonstrated over and over. Do you think Kim Jong-un and his pleasure squad of young females, which is a great honor in that society because it gets extra food and money for the family, do you think he lives in a shanty along with all the other people? Do you think he eats bad food? Do you think Stalin got poor vodka? Come on. Anyway, I'm challenging that. I read it. I don't buy it. So keep doing what you're doing. But be aware when you hear people speak this kind of speech. It's dangerous. And it's not funny. It's no joke. This is the kind of stuff that makes societies collapse. And it did. And ultimately, communism failed in Russia. It's failing in Cuba. It's failing in Argentina. Because really, they say they're socialists. It's a communist system. and you have a dictatorship. That's the end result every time we go down that route. Every time. By all means, by the way, I'm an honest guy and I like to have conversations. If you think I'm wrong, if you think there is an example of a true socialist dictatorship that became successful, that didn't wind up in a bunch of bloodshed, put it in the comments. Let's have a conversation about it. I'm not above having a conversation, but it's going to take some doing. So, folks, that's it for this one. This is a bit of a heavy subject, and it's a bit longer video than I intended, but I want everyone to understand exactly what the philosophy is and what we're seeing right now. Heavy progressive taxes, taking of private property, centralization of credit, equal liability to labor is basically wealth transfer. I'm just saying, if it walks like a duck and swims like a duck and quacks, it is what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, that'll be it. This was a bit of a heavy video, so I apologize if I depressed you. If anything, you shouldn't be depressed. You should be pissed off. You should be asking questions, even if you believe communism and socialism is the way to go. Is that what you want? Do you want to deny other people their right to have a family? Because now you're no better than the people you claim you're fighting against. We can't have my choice, but not your choice. Either everyone gets the choice or nobody gets a choice. So we got to think about that, especially when it comes to families, because that'll be ugly. And a disintegration of the family would be in line of this. Anyway, guys, that's all I got. God bless, Godspeed, think about it, and do your part. Be good.